This week we're going to look at testing and debugging, and I'm going to start with console.log. So let me go ahead and create a new project, and I'll call this logging. And I'll go ahead and create a new JavaScript file in here called log test. And basic idea with console.log is we've been seeing it all the way since CIS 133W. So console.log, and then you can put a list of arguments here, and each argument will be printed separated with a space from the previous argument. So 1, 2, 3. And if I run this, I see in the console 1 space 2 space 3 and then a new line at the end. So here's line 2. And this could be numbers or strings, so I could put 5 here. It can also be an object like number colon 6. And if I run it, 1 space 2 space 3, then a new line, then 4 space the string 5 space, and then a representation of the object. Now what's actually going on under the covers is that console.log is calling a function named util.inspect on each of these arguments, and inspect is returning a string. So if I import util, and I go ahead and console.log util.inspect the string 5, it's going to go ahead and print a representation of the string 5. Now the inspect function itself actually has a bunch of arguments. So let me go ahead and pull up a browser window, and we'll look for util.inspect. And that will take us to node.js.org API util. There's quite a lot of information in the arguments that this thing will take. So you can pass it an object, and of course numbers and strings and so on are all objects in JavaScript. You can also pass it a set of options, and there's an extensive list. You can specify how deep to recurse if you have objects inside of objects inside of objects. It will determine how far to expand those nested objects and so on. So here's a bunch of arguments. Mostly I use an integrated development environment like WebStorm, and so I typically will put a breakpoint on the code and actually look at the objects in the interactive debugger. But sometimes it's convenient to be able to print them to the console instead. So it's nice to know that you have all that power available. Now another thing that you can do that's kind of handy is, let's say I've declared an object like customer is an object, and the customer has a name, say Mark, and an ID 1 2 3 4 5 6 7, and let's say a total spent or total bill 93.25. And then if I console.log that, I get a representation of the object. And let's say I go ahead and make a list of customers. So let customers be a list containing, let's go ahead and make this customer 1. And then if I log customers, I have a list of an object. Now, if this object had more properties on it, it may get confusing to look at, and it might start eliding some of the properties. So let's go ahead and add an address, let's do street, and number, street number. Not actually my correct address. And zip code. And let's do state. And state abbreviation. And phone. And now let's print it. So you see it's starting to get a little messy now because it won't all fit on one line. And so the inspect string that gets produced spans multiple lines. And if I have a whole list of these, it can get really complicated to manage. So let's say I have customer. I'm just going to repeat the same customer because otherwise I have to create another one. And we'll do one more. So if I'm printing this, it's going to be messy, like so. And I might want to be able to look at this in a more concise way. And I can actually do that by adding a method to the object that controls how util.inspect converts it into a string. And the book shows you how to do that, but it shows you a deprecated way which doesn't work anymore. So in the book, what it says is you add an inspect method, and then that's going to be a function that returns a string. So I can return, for example, let's go ahead and use a template, and I'll put number sign curly brackets to delimit the thing, and let's start with a customer with ID. So ID is going to be this.id colon, and then we'll do this.name, and let's do this.total bill. So those might be all the details that I actually need to debug my code at this point. And then another closing curly bracket to match this, which is going to appear in my output. And now if I print it, well, it does the same thing because this doesn't work anymore. But in theory, this would convert it to a string when I print it. Now, the way you do that nowadays is there's a symbol in util called util.inspect.custom. And if you make a property with that symbol as its name, that's how you do it. And to use a symbol as the name of a property, you put it in square brackets, which is a little complicated, but if you just do it, it will work. util.inspect.custom. So that's the current way to do it. And if I run it now, you can see I get my custom format string. Now, this will work with classes as well. So here's the syntax for a class. Let's go ahead and make an animal class. Let's say there's a constructor which takes a type of the animal and let's say name, and stores those properties on the object. And then I'm going to make a list of animals. So this will be a new animal dog named Spot, and a new animal cat named Tabby, I guess. Tiger. Tiger is a name for a cat. Okay. And then a bird named Tweety. And then I'm going to go ahead and print my animals. Like so. And so this is the default way that objects get printed. It shows the class name and then the properties. And I can override that as well by adding a method named util.inspect.custom. And this isn't, I'm not going to pass in any arguments, but in fact, you can pass it depth and properties, just like you can with util.inspect. So let's see if we find util.inspect.custom. Yeah, we'll take a depth and an options. So I'm not going to use either one here. I'm just going to go ahead and return same thing as before, basically. So I'm going to go ahead and mark that out. And we'll go ahead and include name. And now if I print it, it uses my custom formatting. Now, there's one other thing that you can do with console.log that you might not have run into before. You can actually give it a format string, and it will treat other parameters in the list of parameters as values to fill in given those formats. So, for example, I can console.log, my name is %s, and I've been teaching for %d years. And then I give it a name, for example, Mark, and a number, for example, 8.5. And if I pass those in here, I could put just the string Mark and the number 8.5, or I could put the variable. What it's going to do is when it hits this %s, it's going to grab this thing, format it convert it to a string and insert it there. And when it gets it to D, it's going to take this thing, turn it into a number, and insert it there. And so if I run it, I see I get my name is Mark, and I've been teaching for 8.5 years. This will work with integers as well. If I give it, for example, 8.5, or I'm sorry, if I give it 8, for example, I get 8 here. And then there's one other thing you can do, which is you can format an object as JSON string. So console.log JSON colon and then %J. And then I'm going to, I think I have a customer one object. Yeah. So customer one has this custom inspect method. But if I put it here, I still get the JSON representation. So I can actually copy this, and it's syntactically valid JSON with double-quoted property names and so on. And so I can copy and paste that into my code if I need to use it somewhere. Now you'll notice that the property util.inspect.custom is not showing up in the JSON object. And that has to do with how symbols work as property names. So let me go ahead and make another symbol, and I'll call that const my sim is new. Actually, you don't use new with symbol. You just call symbol, and then you give it a description string, which is going to be my symbol. And this makes a new unique symbol object that's guaranteed to be different from all other existing symbols in the system. And then I can use that to make a new property here, my sim in square brackets, because it's a symbol and that's just how they work. And then here I'll just put a value like a value for my sim. Just a piece of text there. And if I run it, you'll see it doesn't show up once again because it's not part of what gets encoded to JSON. So that's just a special thing that symbols do.